Myra had dreamed of this night for almost a full year. And now that the school auditorium was glowing with warm lights and filled with excited parents, she felt her heart beating faster than ever before. She stood backstage in her simple black dress, holding her sheet music close to her chest like it was something precious. She could hear the loud chatter of the audience, the scraping of chairs, the sound of the curtain ropes moving, and all of it mixed inside her mind until she felt both nervous and hopeful at the same time. For months, she had practiced her piano solo, repeating every note over and over until her fingers hurt. She would sit for hours in the empty music room, sometimes even after school closed, because she wanted this performance to be the moment she finally proved she was good enough. She wasn't the most confident girl. She wasn't loud. She didn't talk much, but when she played the piano, she felt like she had a voice that no one could ignore. Her coach, Mr. Harlan, was known for his strict and harsh style. He believed only in perfection, and he spoke to students like a commander giving orders. Myra always tried her best to follow everything he said because she believed he knew what was right. But even then, she always felt he never really saw her. He saw the talented students, the bold ones, the ones who didn't tremble when he raised his voice. Myra was the opposite, quiet, shy, and soft-spoken. But she thought her music would speak loud enough for her. Tonight was supposed to be her chance as she stood behind the curtain. She listened to the opening speeches on stage. The principal talked about how proud she was of all the performers, and the audience clapped again and again. Myra held her breath, imagining how she would walk out to the piano, sit down, and play the first gentle note. She imagined her parents sitting somewhere in the crowd. Smiling with pride, she imagined the applause at the end. For a moment, hope warmed her heart. Then, everything shattered. Mr. Harlan walked toward her with a stiff expression, as if someone had just told him bad news. Myra straightened her posture, thinking he would give her last-minute advice instead. He gave her the sentence that broke her heart. He said, "You won't be performing tonight." His voice was calm, but cold. Myra blinked in confusion, thinking she heard wrong. "What?" she whispered. He crossed his arms and told her he had decided to replace her with another student, the confident boy who always bragged about his talent. "Mr. Harlan," said Myra wasn't ready, that her hands were too shaky, that she didn't have stage presence, that she would ruin the flow of the show. The words stabbed her like small, sharp needles. She felt her throat tighten and her eyes burn. She tried to speak, but no sound came out around them. A few performers overheard their conversation and exchanged uncomfortable looks, but no one said anything. They knew better than to question the coach. Myra felt alone, standing in the middle of the busy backstage area while everything around her kept moving. The world didn't pause for her pain. Mr. Harlan didn't even wait for her response. He simply handed the sheet music to the other student, patted him on the shoulder, and walked away as if nothing important had happened. Myra felt the ground under her feet waver. For months, she had worked, practiced, sacrificed her free time, and believed in herself, only to be told she wasn't good enough on the very night she was meant to shine. She walked to a quiet corner backstage. Trying not to cry in front of everyone, her breathing became uneven, and her fingers trembled as she touched the piano keys of a small practice keyboard placed in the corner. Every note she had practiced suddenly felt useless. Her dream felt stolen. She asked herself what she had done wrong. She replayed the coach's words in her head again and again until they became louder than the applause coming from the stage. As she sat there, she heard the audience cheering for the opening performances. The crowd was full, the lights were bright, and the moment she had dreamed of was happening without her. A painful thought hit her. Her parents were somewhere out there, waiting to see her perform. They had no idea she had just been pushed aside. Her chest hurt as if something heavy was pressing against it. But even through the pain, A small spark inside her refused to die. She felt angry, hurt, and embarrassed, but she also felt something rising inside her, something she had never felt before. It was the quiet beginning of courage. It whispered to her that this moment wasn't the end of her story. It whispered that maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to stand in front of the crowd after all. This painful moment, this heartbreak, became the starting point of the biggest change in her life. And she didn't know it yet, but the night was far from over. Mira's story had only just begun after Mira's world collapsed in a single moment. She stayed in the corner of the backstage area, feeling small and forgotten. The music of other performers filled the hall, but none of it sounded clear to her. It all felt like noise made in a world she no longer belonged to. Every time someone passed by her, she lowered her head, afraid someone would ask why she wasn't getting ready for her performance. She didn't want to explain. She didn't want to talk. She didn't want anyone to see her tears. But even as she sat there, her coach's harsh words echoed inside her mind. "You're not ready. You lack spark. You'll ruin the show." Each sentence hit her again and again, as if her heart was being pressed under a heavy stone. She felt ashamed, not because she thought he was right, but because he said it so easily, so publicly, as if she was nothing more than a mistake he needed to fix. What hurt Mira the most was the way he didn't hesitate. He didn't even stop to think about her feelings. He replaced her like she was just a number on a list. Not a girl who had worked for months, not a girl with dreams. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her dress and tried to calm her breathing. But every time she thought she had control, another wave of pain rushed through her chest. She felt useless, invisible, and defeated. Backstage was busy. Students were fixing costumes, tuning instruments, whispering last-minute lines, but Mira felt completely alone. Then someone quietly sat beside her. It was Lila, her best friend since childhood. Lila had always been brave, loud, and honest. The kind of girl who would defend anyone who couldn't defend themselves. She placed a gentle hand on Mira's shoulder and asked in a soft voice, "What happened?" Mira didn't answer at first. She didn't trust her voice, afraid it would break the moment she tried to speak. But Lila stayed silent and waited. She didn't push. She didn't lecture. She simply stayed. Mira finally whispered the truth, telling her everything the coach said. As she spoke, her voice shook, and she felt embarrassed. The words tasted bitter in her mouth. Lila's expression slowly changed from sadness to anger. Her eyes narrowed, and she clenched her hands into fists. "He replaced you. Now? After everything you practiced?" she said. Her tone was sharp, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mira nodded with her eyes down, ashamed, even though she had done nothing wrong. For a moment, Lila didn't speak. She looked out at the stage where the coach's chosen student was preparing to perform. Then she turned back to Mira with a fire in her eyes. "You don't deserve this," she said firmly. "You deserve your moment." Mira shook her head. "What can I do?" "He already chose someone else." Lila leaned closer and whispered, "There's an open performance slot between acts. You can play then. No one can stop you if you step on stage during that time." Mira's breath caught. The idea terrified her. She imagined walking out in front of hundreds of people without permission. She imagined the coach's angry face. She imagined the whispers, the judgment, the risk of making a mistake in front of everyone. "I can't," she whispered. "People will stare. What if I mess up?" Lila smiled softly. "Mira, you practiced that piece more than anyone else in this entire building. You didn't do it for applause. You did it because you love it." Mira looked down at her trembling hands, remembering the hours she spent alone in the music room, the nights she stayed up late replaying melodies, the times she believed this concert would be her moment. She remembered how playing made her feel alive. She remembered the softness of the keys, and the way the music filled her heart. Lila continued, "This isn't about the coach anymore. This is about you, your voice, your courage. If he can't see your worth, let the crowd see it." The words fell into Mira's heart like warm light. For the first time that night, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't confidence. She was still scared, but it was a small spark of determination. "A tiny flame that refused to die," she whispered. "Do you really think I should?" Lila answered without hesitation. "I think you must." Suddenly, a loud applause came from the auditorium as the chosen student finished his performance. The curtains closed and the announcer's voice echoed backstage, calling for anyone who wanted to fill the open stage minute. It was the moment Lila had mentioned. Mira's heart hammered in her chest. Her fear wrapped around her like thick fog. But Lila took her hand and gently pulled her to her feet. "If you don't go now, you'll regret it forever," she said softly. Mira took one shaky breath, then another. Her legs felt weak. Her stomach felt tight, but she walked forward. One slow step at a time, with Lila beside her. For the first time that night, Mira wasn't thinking about the coach. She wasn't thinking about failure. She was thinking about the music inside her. The music she refused to let die. And with her heart trembling but awake, she moved toward the stage, not knowing that this single brave step would change everything. When Mira took that first shaky step toward the side of the stage, she felt her heart thundering so loudly she thought the whole world could hear it. The hallway lights seemed brighter, the backstage noises sharper, and every breath felt tight inside her chest. She wasn't sure if she was walking toward courage or disaster, but her feet kept moving as if something deep inside her refused to let her stop. Lila walked beside her with steady steps, holding Mira's sheet music gently in her hand, almost like she was protecting it as they reached the curtain area. The backstage volunteers looked at them with surprise. Mira had never volunteered for the open slot before. She was too shy, too quiet, too invisible most days. One volunteer raised an eyebrow as if asking a silent question. Lila spoke before Mira could fall apart. "She's playing." The volunteer hesitated, then nodded. He knew this slot was open to anyone brave enough to step forward. Mira stood still as she waited for the curtains to rise again. Her palms were sweating, and her breathing felt uneven. She could hear the announcer speaking on the microphone, telling the audience there would be a short, open performance before the next scheduled act. People murmured with curiosity, wondering who would play. They weren't expecting much. Open slots were usually filled by last-minute volunteers, not trained performers. Suddenly, Mira heard the footsteps of someone she dreaded, Mr. Id. Harlan, her coach. He approached quickly, his angry voice sharp like a blade. "What do you think you're doing?" He snapped, his words sliced through the air. Mira froze, unable to speak. His face was red with irritation. "I didn't approve this," he said. "You're making a fool of yourself." Lila stepped between them like a shield. "She isn't breaking any rule," she said firmly. "The open slot is open to everyone, mister." Harlan glared at her, then at Mira. "This is reckless," he said. "If you embarrass the program, that's on you." His voice was cold, almost mocking. He thought his words would crush her the same way they had earlier. But something surprising happened inside Mira. Instead of shrinking away, she felt the small flame in her chest grow warmer. His cruelty didn't scare her as much as before. Now it fueled her. She swallowed hard and whispered, "I just want to play." Her coach scoffed and turned away, clearly expecting her to fail. But Mira refused to let his doubts become her truth. She looked at Lila, who squeezed her hand gently in support. That simple touch gave Mira the strength she desperately needed. The curtain began to rise slowly, revealing the stage and the blinding lights. The grand piano stood in the center like a quiet giant waiting for a friend. Myra took one trembling step. Then another. Her legs felt weak, but she kept moving. The audience was still whispering, confused about who she was. Some recognized her as the girl who practiced constantly in the music room. But few had ever seen her perform on stage. Myra reached the piano bench. Her heart was louder than everything around her. She sat down carefully, placing her hands on her lap for a moment. The bright lights made the audience look like a sea of shadows. But she could sense their eyes. She could almost feel their curiosity, their expectations, their uncertainty for a moment. Myra felt like running away, her mind filled with fears. What if her hands shook? What if she forgot the notes? What if the coach laughed at her from backstage? What if the audience stayed silent after her performance? But then she remembered something her mother once told her. When you play, don't think about the people watching. Think about the story your music wants to tell. So Myra closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let her fingers rest gently on the cool piano keys. It felt like touching home. Her shaking slowed. Her breathing softened, and the world around her faded into a quiet, waiting calm behind the curtain. Lila stood with both hands pressed together, silently cheering for her friend. Backstage performers peeked from behind the curtain, stunned that Myra, the quiet girl who never sought attention, had suddenly walked onto the biggest stage of the night. Even a few teachers paused, curious about what she would do. The audience had grown silent almost naturally, sensing something important was about to happen. A hush spread across the auditorium. Myra could hear the soft rustling of clothes, the distant crackle of the microphone, the small hum of the air conditioning, but it all felt far away. Then Myra lifted her hands and let them hover over the keys. The very first note she pressed was soft and gentle, like a whisper. But that single sound carried something powerful: emotion, truth, and courage. It felt like she was pouring all her pain and all her hope into that one simple note. People in the audience leaned forward without realizing it. A few parents exchanged impressed looks. A child stopped talking mid-sentence. The atmosphere shifted. A quiet electricity filled the air. Backstage, Mr. Harlan stopped walking and turned his head sharply when he heard the first few notes. His eyes narrowed, recognizing immediately that something was different, something he had never allowed himself to see in her. And as Myra continued to play, her fear was slowly replaced by something else: belief. She wasn't performing for approval anymore. She wasn't performing for the coach or even for the audience. She was performing for the girl inside her who had practiced alone, cried alone, and dreamed alone. She was giving that girl the moment she deserved. Her journey had shifted. Her heart had opened. And the night was about to change forever, not just for Myra, but for everyone watching her. The moment Myra's fingers began to glide softly across the piano keys, every ounce of fear inside her chest started to melt away. It was as if the piano recognized her touch, as if the music she had carried in her heart for months finally found its way into the world. Each note came out clear, warm, and full of emotion. She didn't rush. She didn't worry. She didn't think about mistakes. She simply let herself breathe through the music. But while Myra played with her eyes closed, backstage was filled with shock. No one had expected her to step on that stage. And no one had expected the sound that now held the entire auditorium still. A few volunteers exchanged surprised looks. One whispered, "Is that really her?" Another said, "Why didn't the coach let her perform?" Their confusion reflected a truth that was becoming very clear. The wrong student had been chosen. Mr. Harlan, the coach, stood frozen near the curtain, his arms slowly lowered from their usual crossed position. His face tightened with a mix of disbelief and irritation. He had always judged her by her silence, her shyness, her trembling hands. Never by her heart, never by her music. Hearing her now felt like a slap of reality he wasn't prepared for. Meanwhile, the audience sat in growing astonishment. They had walked into this performance expecting nothing more than a quick, open slot filler. But instead, they were witnessing something rare, raw talent blooming right in front of them. Parents stopped shifting in their seats. Teenagers stopped whispering to their friends. Even little children were suddenly quiet. The air felt different, warmer, fuller, almost magical. Mira opened her eyes for a moment and saw the faces before her. A sea of shadows lit by stage lights. She didn't focus on any one person. But she felt their attention like a soft pressure on her chest, instead of frightening her. It pushed her forward the more she played. The more she forgot her earlier pain, the notes rose and fell like waves, flowing into every corner of the hall. Her performance wasn't technically flawless. A few notes were slightly softer or louder than intended, but it didn't matter at all. What mattered was the story inside her music. The quiet courage, the hurt she turned into beauty. The hope she rediscovered as her fingers danced across the keys. Backstage, other students gathered behind the curtain. Their eyes were wide. Some of them had always admired Mira's dedication. But they had never heard her perform like this. One girl whispered, "She's incredible." Another added, "Why didn't the coach give her the solo?" They didn't know that Mira herself had been asking the same question in her heart for months. The boy who replaced her stood awkwardly to the side. Clutching his sheet music, his confidence had faded. Replaced with guilt and embarrassment, he had accepted the spot proudly earlier. But now he realized the slot never belonged to him. He wasn't the villain, but he wasn't the rightful performer either. Lila continued to stand backstage with her hands close to her face. Tears forming in her eyes. She knew Mira had talent. But she had never seen her friend play with this much emotion. "This much freedom?" she whispered. "Come on, Mira. Show them everything." Mira reached the middle section of her piece, the most delicate. Emotional part, her fingers moved softly. Almost trembling, every sound felt like a confession. A piece of herself she was offering to the crowd. Her heart felt lighter with each passing second. Her earlier pain did not disappear, but it transformed, turning into something beautiful, something strong. Then something unexpected happened on stage. The spotlight brightened slightly. It wasn't planned. It wasn't part of the open slot. But a technician, moved by her playing, slowly increased the light so that her small figure seated on the piano bench became the glowing center of the entire hall. The audience leaned in even more. Teachers in the front row exchanged looks. This wasn't just a good performance. It was a powerful one, a moment people would talk about long after the night was over. At the back of the hall, Mira's parents sat with puzzled expressions. They recognized their daughter's style even before they could see her clearly on stage. Her mother whispered, "That's Mira." Her father nodded slowly, his eyes widening with pride and disbelief. They had no idea what had happened backstage. But they knew their daughter's hands and her heart. Anywhere, Mr. Harlan stepped closer to the curtain. His jaw clenched. He hadn't expected this. He had always valued confidence over quiet passion, stage presence over depth. But now he was forced to face a truth he had ignored for far too long. Mira wasn't weak. She wasn't unready. She wasn't lacking spark. She had been burning brightly this whole time, and he was the one who couldn't see it. As Mira reached the final section of her piece, her hands steadied, her breathing softened. And the hall remained silent, not with boredom, but with awe. Every person sensed that the song was reaching its climax. A moment that would echo in their hearts long after the night ended. And as the last few notes shimmered through the auditorium like falling stars, Mira prepared to give the performance of her life, the moment that would turn the entire crowd against the coach who had doubted her, and the moment that would mark the beginning of her new courage. The final notes of Mira's middle section floated gently into silence. leaving the entire auditorium in a trance-like stillness. It was the type of silence that didn't come from boredom or confusion, but from deep connection. People were afraid to breathe too loudly, afraid to break the fragile beauty she had created. Myra herself felt suspended between fear and freedom. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, but her fingers remained steady on the keys. For a moment, she sat there, letting the quiet settle, letting the world absorb the emotion she had poured out. She knew the hardest part of her piece was ahead, a powerful, rising climb of notes that required strength, confidence, and absolute belief in herself. The part that Mr. Harlan always said she wasn't ready for. She swallowed softly, knowing this was where she used to tremble during practice. This was where doubt usually won, but tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't playing to satisfy a harsh coach or impress anyone with perfection. She was playing because this music belonged to her, because the story in her heart needed to be heard. She raised her hand slightly, took a calming breath, and then pressed down into the beginning of the crescendo. The sound burst forward, rich and powerful. Like a flame that had finally found air, it surprised even her. The strength in her own hands startled her, like she was hearing herself for the first time. The audience visibly reacted. Some people sat up straighter. Others brought a hand to their chest. One elderly woman in the front row whispered, "My goodness." This child, the music swept across the room like a wave, and the crowd let it crash over them willingly. Backstage, the other performers were gathered tightly, staring through the narrow space between curtains. A boy with glasses whispered, She's amazing," another girl replied. "She plays like she's telling a story." Even the boy who had taken her solo felt his face heat with embarrassment and regret. He wished he had spoken up earlier. He wished he had told the coach. "She deserves this more than me." And Lila stood with her fists pressed against her mouth, tears running silently down her cheeks. She had always believed in Myra, but this moment felt bigger than anything she could have imagined. She whispered, "She's finally shining." But not everyone backstage was filled with awe. Mr. Harlan stood with his jaw tight, his eyes sharp. He wanted to walk away, pretend this wasn't happening, but he couldn't. Every note coming from the stage felt like a direct challenge to his judgment. His pride twisted, his ego stung, and a cold realization pushed into his chest. He had been wrong, deeply wrong. He watched as Myra's music rose higher, fuller, overflowing with passion he had never bothered to see. He felt the eyes of some teachers on him, silently questioning his choices, silently judging the mistake he tried to hide. Meanwhile, Myra's parents were now standing in the back of the audience. They had sneaked closer once they recognized her playing. Her mother's hands were trembling against her lips. "She's never played like this at home," she whispered. Her father nodded. "Because she's fighting for something," he said softly. "She's proving something to herself on stage." Myra entered the rushing swell of her climax. The part she always feared suddenly felt like flying. Her fingertips danced faster. Her arms moved with confidence she didn't know she had. She wasn't controlling the music anymore. The music was carrying her, lifting her, healing her. She remembered all the times she cried quietly after tough rehearsals, all the moments she doubted her worth, all the nights she played in an empty room, hoping someone, anyone, would notice her passion. And now here she was, standing in the center of the entire auditorium's attention. No longer invisible, no longer underestimated. As she moved into the final stretch, a powerful memory flashed through her mind, the moment earlier when Mr. Harlan told her she would ruin the show. The humiliation she felt sparked something inside her again. But instead of hurting her, it fueled her hands. She pressed the keys harder, stronger, pouring everything he made her feel into the music, letting her pain transform into something beautiful. The sound soared, The kind of sound that fills not just a room, but hearts. People in the audience felt their eyes sting. They didn't know her story yet, but they felt it in every note. They felt the heartbreak, the courage, the fight. The auditorium seemed to breathe with her, the lights glowing softer around her small figure on the bench. For the first time in her life, she wasn't playing in the shadows. She was standing right in the center of her own light. Her final notes approached, gentle, falling like soft raindrops after a storm, each tone carrying warmth, softness, and quiet triumph. It was as if the music itself bowed with her, thanking her for trusting it when she pressed the very last key. The sound rang through the room like a final heartbeat. Mira lifted her hands off the piano and let them rest in her lap. Her chest rose in a shaky breath. She finally opened her eyes fully and looked at the audience, and in that frozen moment, she could not yet imagine what would happen next, how the crowd would react, how the coach's world would collapse, and how her life would change forever. Her story was building toward an explosion, and the crowd was seconds away from erupting. For a long, breathless second after Mira finished the last note, the auditorium stayed absolutely silent. It wasn't the silence of confusion or hesitation. It was a silence that comes right after something powerful, like the moment the world takes one deep breath before it reacts. Myra sat frozen on the piano bench, her hands resting gently in her lap, her chest rising and falling with small, shaky breaths. She didn't dare look up, afraid that the audience might not have liked it, afraid that her courage might have ended in humiliation. Then the silence cracked with one loud clap. Then another, then 10 more, within seconds. The entire hall erupted with applause, so loud it echoed off the walls. People stomped their feet. Parents stood up from their seats. Teachers clapped with genuine shock, and some students even shouted her name. It was the kind of applause given not out of politeness, but out of pure respect and admiration. Mira blinked in disbelief. Her eyes widened as she saw row after row of people rising to their feet, giving her a standing ovation. Her heart shook inside her chest. She had never imagined a reaction like this. She had hoped maybe for a soft clap, maybe a few smiles. But this was the crowd celebrating her like she was the star of the night. Backstage, the performers watching through the curtains nearly dropped their things. One girl whispered in stunned awe, "She got a standing ovation." Another said, "I've never seen the crowd stand for a student solo before." The boy who replaced her earlier lowered his head, guilt tightening inside his chest. He realized the applause should have been for her from the beginning. Lila couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down her face as she clapped harder than anyone else. She had always believed in Mira, but seeing the whole auditorium share that belief made her heart burst with pride. She whispered shakily, "You did it, Mira. You really did it." Meanwhile, at the very right side of the curtain, Mr. Harlan stood stiff and pale. He had never heard the crowd cheer like this for any of the students he chose. His face tightened with anger and shame. This wasn't just applause. This was a public declaration that he had been wrong. Completely wrong. The people he hoped to impress were now witnessing what he had failed to see. The applause continued, growing louder, refusing to fade. A few people even whistled, something rarely allowed in school concerts. One mother in the audience wiped her eyes and said, "She plays like she's lived through something." Another father whispered, "Why wasn't she given the main solo?" Her parents stood in the crowd, hands over their mouths, hearts pounding with overwhelming pride. Mira's mother cried without caring who saw her. Her father clapped with such strength that his hands stung. They had always seen their daughter practice at home with quiet dedication. But seeing her command a stage like this was beyond anything they imagined. Mira pressed her trembling hands against the piano bench. Unsure if she should stand or remain seated, her legs felt like they were made of air. She slowly rose, feeling her body almost weightless. She gave a small bow, shy and unsure. But the moment she bowed, the applause somehow grew even louder. The crowd wasn't just praising her talent, they were praising her courage. They had no idea what happened backstage, but they could feel a story behind her music. They sensed her struggle, her bravery, her triumph. The entire room had felt her heart through the keys as she stepped back from the piano. Something unexpected happened. Several students from the audience rushed forward to the front of the stage. Trying to get a better look, one girl shouted, "You were amazing." A boy held up his phone, recording her walk, capturing her moment of victory. When Mira turned to exit the stage, she saw Mr. Harlan standing near the curtain. His jaw tight, his pride shattered. For a second, their eyes met. Mira expected anger or disappointment, or even an order for her to leave. But instead, she saw something else. Fear. Deep, shaking fear. The kind someone feels when they realize they pushed the wrong person down. And that person rose higher than anyone expected. He stepped forward stiffly. Trying to regain authority, "Mira," he began. But his voice cracked. He forced it smoother. "We will need to talk about this." He expected her to shrink back. But Mira wasn't the same frightened girl from earlier. Something inside her had changed forever. Before he could continue, a group of teachers approached Mira. They praised her performance, told her she had moved the entire audience, and asked who trained her. Mira glanced at Mr. Harlan. But the teachers didn't wait for an answer. They turned to him and said, "Why did you not give her the solo?" This was outstanding. His face turned red. He tried to speak, but his words tangled painfully in his throat. The teacher's disappointment cut him deeper than Mira's music ever could. Mira stood there silently, overwhelmed but stronger than ever. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to explain. Her performance had spoken louder than any words she could ever say. The applause still echoed faintly behind her as she walked backstage, and she didn't know it yet. But this was only the beginning, because what happened next would shake the entire school, turn the crowd even more against her coach, and change Mira's life forever. When Mira stepped off the stage and into the backstage hallway, she felt as if she were floating instead of walking. The applause still thundered behind her like distant waves, echoing in her ears even after the curtains closed. She pressed a hand against her chest, trying to steady her racing heart. She had never imagined a moment like this, not even in her dreams. Students rushed toward her the second she appeared backstage, their faces glowing with excitement and disbelief. One girl grabbed her hands and said, "I didn't know you could play like that." Another boy shook his head in awe. That wasn't just good, that was professional. Mira stood still, overwhelmed, her eyes wide as people praised her from every direction. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. For years, she had been the quiet one, the background student, the girl who practiced alone in an empty music room. Now she was at the center of the school's admiration. She didn't know whether to smile, cry, or simply breathe. Lila rushed in next, pushing past the crowd and wrapping Mira in a tight hug. "You did it," she whispered fiercely. "You proved everyone wrong." Especially him. Mira laughed weakly through her tears. "I can't believe they stood up for me," she said. Lila wiped her cheek, smiling proudly. "Believe it. They felt your heart," but the warmth of celebration did not last long. Soon, murmurs spread across the backstage area. Students whispered to one another, glancing nervously at the hallway. Mira turned to see what they were looking at, and saw Mr. Harlan approaching. His face was stiff, pale, and tight with anger mixed with panic. He was not used to being questioned. And he especially wasn't used to being proven wrong in front of an entire auditorium. His voice was sharp when he spoke. "Mira, come with me," he said. His tone carried a false calmness that fooled no one. Mira froze for a moment, her stomach tightening. Lila stepped forward immediately, blocking him like a wall. "She doesn't have to go anywhere with you," she said firmly. A few students nodded behind her. Showing support, Mr. Harlan narrowed his eyes. "This is between me and my student," he said through clenched teeth, but Lila didn't move. "It stopped being between you and her the moment you humiliated her," she replied. More students gathered around Myra, forming a loose, protective circle. The coach wasn't used to resistance, especially not from his own group of performers. His pride cracked even more. Just then, the auditorium doors swung open, and several parents walked inside the backstage hallway. Mira's parents were in front, her mother's cheeks wet with tears, her father's eyes red from emotion. They rushed to Mira and pulled her into a hug. Her mother whispered, "You were breathtaking." Her father held her shoulders gently and said, "We are so proud of you, sweetheart." The crowd of parents behind them took notice too. One mother said loudly, "Why wasn't she on the main program?" Another added sharply, "Why did we watch weaker performances when she was here the whole time?" Murmurs of frustration and anger filled the hallway. Parents who didn't even know Myra personally stood up for her simply because her performance had touched them deeply. A teacher from the judging panel approached next. She looked directly at Mr. Harlan. "We need an explanation," she said. "Why did she not get the solo spot?" Mr. Harlan swallowed hard. "She wasn't ready," he muttered. But the teacher shook her head immediately. "Anyone who heard her tonight knows she was more than ready." Another teacher stepped forward and added, "You misjudged her, and now the whole school knows it." A noticeable shift happened in the hallway. Eyes turned on the coach, and the weight of his mistake pressed down on him like a stone. He tried to defend himself, but every word he spoke sounded weaker than the one before it. Every excuse he made fell apart because Mira's performance had already revealed the truth. Mira watched quietly, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and closure. She wasn't happy to see him embarrassed, but she couldn't deny the justice in the moment. For the first time, people were seeing her for who she truly was. The crowd of parents grew louder. Some demanded that the school review his decisions. Others said he owed Myra an apology. Several performers even stepped forward and said openly, "He treats us unfairly. He picks favorites. He never listens." The hallway buzzed with tension, anger, and rising voices. Mr. Harlan pressed his hands against his forehead. Trying to regain control, finally, he turned to Mira. His voice unsteady, "Mira, we should talk privately." But Mira took a small step back, her eyes steady and calm for the first time. "I don't have anything to discuss," she said softly but confidently. "Tonight, I said everything through my music." The hallway fell silent for a moment. Everyone felt the quiet strength in her words. Even Lila stared in admiration. Mr. Harlan lowered his gaze, the reality impossible to escape now. He had pushed down the wrong student, and she had risen higher than he ever expected. Myra looked around her at the students supporting her, at the teachers ready to defend her, at the parents cheering for her, and at her family holding her with pride. And she finally understood something. She was not invisible. She was not weak. She was not unready. Her voice didn't come through loud words. Her voice came through music, and tonight, it had spoken louder than anything her coach could ever say. But the night wasn't over yet, because one final moment still waited, the public apology that would shock the entire auditorium and end the coach's power over her forever. The tension in the backstage hallway grew heavier with every passing second. Parents stood with crossed arms, teachers exchanged uncomfortable glances, and students whispered in tight clusters. Myra remained in the center of it all, her hands still trembling from the performance, but her heart steady and strong. She had never imagined that one night, one brave choice could change so much. Slowly, a member of the event staff walked into the hallway and announced, "Everyone, please return to the auditorium. We will be making an important announcement." People began moving, still buzzing with questions, still glancing at Mira like she was the center of a story they needed to witness to the end. Mira's parents held her hands as they all walked together toward the bright hall. Inside the auditorium, the air was thick with curiosity. The lights dimmed again, and whispers filled every row. Some people asked, "Is there another performance?" Others said, "Maybe she'll play again," but most wondered what the school planned to say after the uproar backstage. Mira stood on the side of the stage with Lila and her parents. Watching from behind the curtain, her stomach felt tight, but her heart felt strangely calm. She had already done the hardest part. She had shown the world her truth through music. Finally, the principal stepped onto the stage. She adjusted the microphone and cleared her throat. "Before we continue with the event," she said, her voice strong, "we need to address what happened tonight." The audience grew very quiet. A few teachers shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Harlan stood off to the side, pale and rigid. The principal continued, "Tonight, we witnessed something extraordinary." She looked towards the wings of the stage. Directly where Myra stood hidden, a performance that touched every heart in this room. People nodded. Some even clapped lightly. "Mira Reyes," the principal said, "gave us a performance worthy of the main program, and worthy of far more recognition than she has received." The applause began again. Louder this time, Mira felt her cheeks warm and her eyes soften. The principal then turned toward the right side of the stage. "However," she said firmly, "it has come to our attention that Mira was unfairly removed from her solo position by her coach." Without proper cause, a ripple of anger spread through the audience. People murmured loudly. Some parents even shouted, "Shame." Mr. Harlan's shoulders stiffened, but he remained frozen. The principal continued, "As a school, we do not tolerate unfair treatment of our students. Nor do we ignore their talent." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "Mr. Harlan, please step onto the stage." The entire hall held its breath. Mira watched as he slowly walked onto the stage, his steps heavy, his pride slipping away with every movement. His eyes avoided the audience. He stood stiffly beside the principal, trying to maintain authority. But the crowd's cold silence crushed whatever authority he had left. The principal looked at him directly. "You owe this student an apology?" The hall exploded with applause and cheers. Students clapped. Parents whistled. Even some teachers nodded in agreement. Mr. Harlan looked toward Myra. His eyes filled with regret, fear, and embarrassment. She stepped onto the stage slowly, guided by Lila and her parents. The crowd cheered the moment they saw her. She felt small and huge at the same time, overwhelmed but determined, standing only a few feet from her coach. She waited. The light shone on both of them, and the entire hall leaned in to hear what would happen next. Mr. Harlan swallowed hard. He looked at the floor first, then forced himself to look at Mira. His voice was low and shaky. "Mira, I judged you unfairly," he said. "I misread your abilities. I ignored your dedication. And I am truly sorry." His words dropped into the silent auditorium like heavy stones. Mira did not smile, did not gloat, did not enjoy his shame. Instead, she simply nodded respectfully. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice carried more strength than she knew she had. The principal turned to the crowd. "From this moment forward," she announced, "Myra Reyes will be offered a special spotlight performance at our upcoming state showcase. She will represent our school." The audience erupted again. Many people stood up, cheering so loudly that Mira felt her heart vibrate inside her chest. Her parents hugged her tightly. Lila cried openly. The students swarmed the stage, cheering her name. Myra felt waves of emotion crash through her relief. Joy, pride, disbelief, in the corner of the crowd. The boy who took her original solo spot approached her. He looked ashamed but sincere. "I'm really sorry," he said quietly. "That place should have been yours." Mira smiled kindly. "It's okay," she replied. "Tonight was meant to happen this way." Later, when the auditorium emptied and the night air grew cool, Mira stood outside with her parents and Lila. Looking up at the stars, she felt peaceful, as if the universe had listened to her music and answered back. She had walked onto that stage with trembling hands. She walked off it with a future. She walked into the night, no longer the invisible girl, but a musician, a fighter, and someone who finally believed in her own worth. Her story did not end with the applause, it began with it. Because this night had changed everything, and her music would carry her far beyond the walls that once held her back.